When I was 29 years old, a man left me standing at the altar and told his mother, loud enough for 30 guests to hear, that I was too much for him to love. 3 months later, another man left me in the Montana woods during the first snow of winter and told me a woman my size could walk 6 miles in the dark without any trouble. That was the night I thought I would die. And that was the night I met Ezra Calloway. My name is Ruth Abernathy. I was born in Pittsburgh in the spring of 1858, the only daughter of a druggist named Thomas Abernathy and his wife Cora, who cooked for a wealthy family on Penn Avenue. My father taught me how to read a label. My mother taught me how to read a room. Between the two of them, I learned enough to survive a world that did not much want me in it. I was a heavy child. I grew into a heavier woman. My mother used to say that life was a cold river, and a woman needed padding to get across it. She fed me love in the shape of bread and butter and molasses cake. She did not know she was building walls I would later have to tear down. By the time I was 20, both my parents were gone. My father to consumption. My mother to grief 3 years after him. I kept the druggist's shop open for a while, mixing tonics for old women who still remembered my father's hands. I knew the weight of a grain. I knew the color of good quinine. I knew how to read Latin off a bottle in candlelight. What I did not know was how to be loved. Arthur Brennan came into the shop on a rainy afternoon in October of 1885. He was tall. He was handsome in a soft way, like a man who had never been asked to lift anything heavier than his own opinion. He was the youngest son of a Steele family, and he told me later that what he loved most about me was that I listened. I think what he meant was that I was quiet enough to let him hear himself talk. He courted me for a year. He brought flowers. He walked me to church. He told me I had kind eyes. He did not say I was beautiful, and I did not ask him to. I had spent most of my life knowing the difference between kindness and lies. He proposed 3 weeks after my mother died. I said yes because I was tired. I said yes because the house was empty. I said yes because I thought finally life had decided to give me a small good thing. The wedding was set for January the 2nd. I sewed my own dress. I could not afford to buy one, and I did not want to ask. I sewed it by the window where my mother used to sit, and when I put it on for the final fitting, I looked in the glass and thought for a moment that I looked almost like a bride. The church was West Presbyterian on Liberty Avenue. 30 guests, a small organ, a plain altar with 2 white candles burning in the January cold. Arthur arrived 11 minutes late. He walked up the aisle. He looked at me. He did not look at me the way a man should look at a woman he is about to marry. He looked at me the way a man looks at a horse he has changed his mind about buying. He turned to his mother, who was sitting in the front pew in a blue silk dress. He did not whisper. I want you to understand that. He did not try to hide it. He said it at full voice, so that every guest in that church heard him clearly. He said, "Mother, you were right. I can't. She is just too much." Then he walked out. I stood at the altar for 31 minutes. I know because I counted the ticks of the clock above the choir loft. I could not move. The minister came down from the pulpit and took my elbow and walked me to the vestry. Someone brought me water. Someone else brought me a coat. No one brought me a reason. I went home that night and took off the dress. I folded it. I put it in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, and I did not shed a tear. I had used them all when my mother died. There were none left for a man who had never really known me. 3 days later, the story was in the Pittsburgh papers. Not by name, but everyone in my church knew. Everyone in my neighborhood knew. When I walked to the market, women lowered their eyes. Men coughed and looked at their shoes. A boy I had known since he was born called across the street, "Hey, that's the lady who got left." I closed the druggist shop in February. In March, I found the advertisement. It was in the back pages of the Pittsburgh Gazette in a column titled Matrimonial. Most of them were flowery. Most of them promised gardens and prosperous farms and tender hearts. Ezra Calloway's advertisement was 4 lines long. I need a wife. I live alone on a mountain in Montana. The country is hard, and I will not lie about it. If you come, you must stay. I do not chase anyone, but I also do not turn anyone away. Write to E. Calloway, General Delivery, Silver Creek, Montana Territory. I read it 3 times. I read it because it did not lie to me. It did not promise me a garden I would have to tend. It did not promise me love. It promised me a door that would not close in my face. I wrote back that same evening. I told him my age. I told him I was the daughter of a druggist. I told him I could mix medicines, keep a house, and read a Bible. I told him I was a large woman, and that if this would not suit him, he should say so now, and I would not take offense. His reply came 4 weeks later. It was shorter than mine. "Miss Abernathy, your size does not concern me. My mountain does not care what a person looks like. It only cares whether they will stay. Come when you can. E. Calloway." I sold the shop for less than it was worth. I sold my mother's furniture. I kept her recipe book and my father's mortar and pestle and 3 dresses. I bought a one-way ticket on the Northern Pacific Line. I left Pittsburgh on the 22nd of December, 1886. The train took 11 days. I arrived at the station in Silver Creek on the evening of January the 2nd, 1887. 1 year to the day after Arthur Brennan had left me at the altar. I want you to understand the weather. The sky was the color of old iron. The snow was already 6 inches deep on the platform and coming down harder. There was no one to meet me. A station master told me Mr. Calloway had come at noon, waited 2 hours, and then ridden out to check a trapline, promising to return by 4. It was now past 5. The station master shrugged. He said the mountain weather was unpredictable, and Mr. Calloway was a reliable man, and I should wait. I waited another 40 minutes. Then a man in a long, dirty coat came out of the station office and asked if I needed a ride into town. He said his name was Hollister. He had a wagon and 2 horses and a face that looked like it had not smiled in years except at its own jokes. He said he knew where Calloway's place was. He said he would take me for $3. I gave him the $3. It was almost everything I had left. He loaded my trunk into the back of the wagon. He watched me climb up to the seat. He did not help me. I saw him smile at the way I had to pull myself up, and something small and cold turned in my stomach. But I told myself I was tired, and I was imagining things, and this man was taking me to my husband. We drove out of Silver Creek on a rutted road that wound up into the foothills. The snow kept falling. The light kept fading. We passed a farmhouse, then a cabin, then nothing at all but pine trees and the sound of the horses breathing hard. After 2 hours, he stopped the wagon. I looked around. There was no house. There was no road turning off. There was only forest on both sides and a sky going black above the trees. "Get down, lady," he said. "This isn't Silver Creek," I said. "This isn't any place." "It's 6 miles to Calloway's cabin," he said. "Straight up that ridge. You can't miss it." I looked at the ridge. I looked at the snow coming down. I looked at the dark. I can't walk 6 miles, I said. My voice was very quiet. He laughed. Sure you can, he said. A woman your size, you've got plenty of padding. You fall down, it won't hurt. Hell, you probably can't tell the difference between snow and your own self. He laughed again. He threw my trunk off the back of the wagon. It landed hard in the snow. Then he turned the horses around. Then he drove away. I stood on the road and watched the wagon disappear into the gray. I heard the harness bells for a long time after I could no longer see him. Then I heard nothing. The silence of a forest at dusk in deep snow is not a silence most people have heard. It is not empty. It is full. Full of the way the snow presses down on the branches. Full of the creaking of the trees. Full of the small sounds that small things make when they think no one is listening. I started walking. I want to tell you that I was brave. I was not brave. I was a woman in a wool coat that had been my mother's, carrying a carpet bag with a Bible and 2 clean handkerchiefs in it, trying to get to a husband I had never seen up a ridge I could not make out in the dying light. I walked for what felt like an hour. It was probably 20 minutes. The snow was past my knees in places. My shoes filled up. My feet went from cold to burning to numb. I passed a small tree that had been split by lightning, and I remember thinking I should remember this tree so I can find my way back. Back to where? Back to the road where a man had left me. I walked further. I heard a howl. It was far off. A long, thin sound that rose and fell and rose again. I did not know if it was a wolf or a coyote or a dog gone feral. It did not matter. It was the sound of a thing that had teeth somewhere in the dark, and I was a slow thing alone in the snow. I began to shake. The tears came without my permission and froze on my face because I understood with a clarity I had never known before that I was going to die. And I was going to die because a man thought I was a joke. I fell the first time. I got up. I fell the second time, and my knee hit a stone under the snow, and the pain brought me back for a moment. I got up. I fell the third time, and I did not get up. I lay on my side in the snow, and I looked at the sky, and I thought about my mother. I thought about her hands when she was cooking. I thought about the smell of her kitchen. I thought about how she had told me that a woman needed padding to get across the cold river of life. I whispered, "Mother, I'm sorry. I should not have left Pittsburgh." Then I heard footsteps. Not a wolf. A man. Slow. Heavy. Each step sinking deep into the snow. A shape came out from between the pines. A tall shape. A big shape. A bear coat. A thick beard under a hat. A rifle carried easy across one shoulder. And on the leg of his trousers, a dark wet stain that I would learn later was the blood of a coyote he had shot a quarter-mile back after he heard the same howl I did and knew that somewhere in the dark there was a woman who could not run. He stopped 3 paces away. He did not rush. He did not shout. He looked at me for what felt like a long time. I thought, this is how it ends. I am going to die at the hands of a stranger in the woods, and no one in Pittsburgh will ever know. Then he knelt down. He laid the rifle on the snow. He took the bear coat off his own shoulders. "Are you Ruth?" he said. I could not speak. I nodded. "I am Ezra," he said. "I have been walking since 4 o'clock to find you." He put the coat around me. It was heavy. It was warm. It smelled of smoke and pine and some wild thing I had no name for. He bent down and picked me up. He did not grunt. He did not pause. He lifted me the way a man lifts a child who has fallen asleep on a long journey. I whispered against his shoulder because I could not stop the habit. I had been apologizing for my body since I was 12 years old. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm heavy." He stopped walking. 1 beat, 2. Then he spoke very quietly, so quietly, I was not sure if he was speaking to me or to himself. He said, "You are not heavy. You are exactly what you are supposed to be. And any man who ever told you otherwise was wrong, Ruth. Wrong all the way down." That was the first thing Ezra Calloway ever said to me. He carried me for 2 hours. I know because when I finally woke up inside his cabin, the tall clock against the wall read 9 minutes past 8, and I remembered the station master had said Ezra had ridden out at 2, and I had been on the road with Hollister until nearly 5, and I had walked until I fell, and then this man had carried me through the snow. He had carried a woman my size for 2 hours in a blizzard without once setting me down. The cabin was small, one main room with a fieldstone hearth, a door to the left, a door to the right. Rough pine walls, clean, swept floor, a kettle steaming on the iron stove. A wolf skin hung on one wall. A shelf of books stood by the window. On the mantel, a tin cup, a worn Bible, and a single photograph in a tarnished frame that I could not see clearly from where I lay. I was on a narrow bed against the far wall, buried under 3 wool blankets and a quilt. My shoes were off. My stockings were off. My feet had been rubbed with something that smelled of tallow and pepper, and they burned, which meant they were coming back to life. Ezra was sitting in a straight-backed chair near the hearth. He had pulled the chair close. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the fire. His hands were wrapped in a damp cloth. I stared at his hands, and I understood what I was seeing. His fingers were red and swollen and cracked at the knuckles. Frostbite. Not bad, but real. Because he had given me the bear coat and walked 2 hours through a blizzard in only his wool shirt. I tried to speak. My throat would not work. I tried again. "Ezra," I said. I did not know his voice as mine yet. The word felt strange in my mouth. He turned his head. He did not smile. He did not look surprised. He just looked at me the way a man looks at a fire he has been tending for a long time to make sure it has not gone out. "You are awake," he said. "Good. Your hands. They will be fine. You walked without the coat." He did not answer. He got up. He poured something from the kettle into a tin cup. He brought it to me. He lifted my head gently and held the cup to my mouth. It was broth, beef, and salt, and something dark I could not name. It went into me like a living thing. "Drink slow," he said. I drank slow. When the cup was empty, he set it on the floor. He sat back down on the chair. He did not move closer. He did not try to touch me. He said, "There are 2 bedrooms in this house. You are in the back one. That is yours. I sleep in the front one. Until we are married by the minister, that is how it will be. I am not the kind of man you are afraid I might be. You are safe here. Do you understand me? I nodded. I could not speak again. I was too full of warmth, too full of broth, too full of the fact that I was still alive, too full of the fact that a man had walked 4 hours through a blizzard to find a woman he had never seen and had given her his coat and his hands. He saw that I was done. He stood. "Sleep," he said. "I will be on the other side of that wall. If you need anything, you knock on it. Do not get up to find me. Your feet are not ready." Then he stepped toward the other door. He paused at the threshold. He did not turn around. He said, "Ruth." "Yes, welcome home." He closed the door behind him. I lay in the dark and I listened. I heard him move through the front room. I heard the stove lid lift and drop. I heard him lay down logs for morning. I heard the creak of a bed on the other side of the wall, and then a long stillness, and then the slow, even breathing of a man who had done what he set out to do and was going to sleep. I closed my eyes. I did not weep, but I felt something inside me shift. A plank that had been crooked for a very long time settled back into place so quietly, I almost did not hear it. The next morning, Ezra was already up when I woke. The fire was burning high. A pot of oats was bubbling on the stove. He had laid one of his own flannel shirts on the chair by my bed with a folded note pinned to it. "For walking to the outhouse. The snow is deep. Take my boots in the corner. They will be too big." "That is good. Easier to walk." I put on the shirt. It came down to my knees. I put on his boots. They swallowed my feet like a joke I was finally old enough to laugh at. I went outside. The sky was pale blue. The snow was waist deep off the path, but he had shoveled a clean, narrow trench all the way to the outhouse. He had done it before I woke up. When I came back inside, he was at the stove. He did not look up. "Sit," he said. "Eat." I sat. I ate. Oats with molasses and a strip of salt pork and black coffee strong enough to bend a spoon. He sat across from me. He ate in silence. He did not watch my plate. He did not count what I took. He did not measure me. When I was done, he spoke. "There are some things we should settle," he said. "I am a plain man. I will tell you plain. Is that all right?" "Yes, we will go into town on Friday. The minister rides through on Fridays. His name is Hollis. I have spoken to him. We will be married in the church at noon." I nodded. "After that, you will be my wife by law. But I will not come to this room until you tell me I may." That is not me being gentle. That is me being honest. I do not want you to ever feel that you owed anyone your body, Ruth. Not me, not any man. I could not speak. I nodded. He went on. "You will run the house. I will run the mountain. I trap in winter. I cut timber in spring. I guide hunting parties in fall. I make enough. You will not be rich, but you will not be hungry. Anything you need, you tell me. Anything you want, you tell me. I am not good at guessing." I opened my mouth. I closed it. I opened it again. "Why me?" I said. He looked up from his coffee for the first time since we had sat down. His eyes were gray. Not cold gray. The gray of a river under ice, moving underneath, alive underneath. He said, "Because your letter did not lie." I did not know what to say to that. He stood. He put his plate in the wash basin. "I have traps to check," he said. "I will be back before dark. There is bread in the box and cheese in the cold pantry. Do not go further than the woodpile. I mean that, Ruth. Not today. The ridge is not safe until I show it to you." Then he was gone. I spent that first day learning the cabin. I opened every cabinet. I looked at every shelf. I was not snooping. I was taking inventory the way my father had taught me to take inventory of a druggist's shop. Knowing where a thing is kept tells you what a man values. Ezra valued simple things: salt, flour, coffee, dried beans in a stone crock, smoked venison hanging in the cold pantry, a good iron pan, 3 pairs of wool socks darned with careful, clumsy stitches that I realized with something warm rising in my chest he had done himself. On the shelf by the window there were 11 books. A Bible, a farmer's almanac from 1884, a thin volume of poems by Walt Whitman, its cover worn soft as cloth, a medical manual, 3 books on animal husbandry, a cavalry manual from the United States Army 1871 edition, a journal of Lewis and Clark, 2 novels, Oliver Twist, and a worn copy of The Pilgrim's Progress, and 1 small leather-bound book sitting apart from the others tied shut with a strip of rawhide. I did not touch that one. On the mantel, the photograph. I walked over and looked at it. It was an old tintype, faded and scratched. 2 young men standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a wooden porch. The one on the left was Ezra younger, beardless, his face so open it was almost a different face. The one on the right was a boy of perhaps 18, skinny, grinning, an arm thrown around Ezra's shoulders. On the back of the frame in small, careful pencil, someone had written, "Ezra and Jonah May, 1878. I put the photograph back exactly where it had been. He came home at dusk with 3 rabbits on a string and a bruise on his cheek I did not ask about. We ate rabbit stew. He did not speak much. I did not press him. I was learning that his silence was not the silence of a man who had nothing to say. It was the silence of a man who did not waste words. After supper, I washed the dishes. He sat by the fire and cleaned his rifle. The wind picked up outside. The cabin creaked. The stove ticked as it cooled. I took my mending to the chair opposite him. He had a shirt with a long tear at the shoulder. I had seen it hanging on a peg. I took it down without asking and sat down and began to sew. He glanced at me once. He did not say thank you. He did not say you do not have to. He just watched me for a moment and then went back to the rifle. We sat that way for 20 minutes, maybe longer. There was only the sound of my needle going through cloth and the sound of his oiled rag going along the barrel of the rifle and the fire and the wind. It was a kind of peace I had not known before. I was not performing. I was not making myself smaller or quieter or prettier or less. I was just sitting. I was just breathing. I was just mending a shirt. And a man across the fire was letting me be without asking anything of me. At one point, he spoke without looking up. "The man in Pittsburgh," he said. I stopped sewing. "Do you still think about him?" I thought for a long moment before I answered. I wanted to give a true answer. I owed him a true answer. I said less each week. I used to think about him as someone who had hurt me. Now I think about him as someone who made a decision I am glad every day that he made, because if he had not made it, I would not be sitting in this cabin tonight. Ezra was quiet. He kept cleaning the rifle. But I saw his shoulders change. a small thing, a softening I do not know how else to describe. He said, my mother used to say, the Lord gave us two kinds of people in this world. People who lift and people who lean. The ones who lift do not always say much. The ones who lean do most of the talking. Your Pittsburgh man was a leaner. You are a lifter. I saw it in your letter before I ever saw your face. I did not answer. I could not. I bent my head back to the mending because I did not want him to see my eyes fill. He gave me the gift of not noticing. He went back to the rifle. The needle went through the cloth. The wind went around the cabin. The fire burned down slowly. Neither of us spoke again for a long while, and it was the most peaceful quiet I had ever known. We were married on Friday at noon in the small white church in Silver Creek. Reverend Hollis was a thin man with a kind, tired face. He read the words out of a worn book. Josephine Hale, the widow who kept the boarding house in town, stood as my witness. Dr. Cyrus Wexford, the town physician, stood as Ezra's. There were no flowers. There was no music. There was a cold draft coming in under the church door, and a single candle burning on the altar. And I wore my second best dress, because my first best dress was still folded in a cedar chest, in a house that had been sold to pay for my train ticket. I did not weep when Ezra said I do. I did when he looked at me afterward and tucked a loose piece of hair behind my ear with a finger that was still red from the frostbite he had taken for me, and said there, "Now nobody can argue with it." Josephine hugged me. Dr. Wexford shook Ezra's hand with a long look I did not understand yet. The Reverend signed the paper. Outside the church, Josephine caught my arm. "Ruth," she said. Her voice was low. Her eyes were moving, watching the street, making sure no one else was close enough to hear. "There is something you need to know before you go back up the mountain." I waited. "There was a woman who came in on Tuesday's stage," she said. "A stranger. She took a room at my boarding house. She is still there. Her name is Kowalski. Delphine Kowalski. She came up from Butte. She has been asking about your husband." "Asking what?" "Asking everything. Where he lived, how long he had been here, whether he was alone." I felt my breath go shallow. Why I said. Josephine hesitated. She looked toward Ezra, who was talking to Dr. Wexford by the wagon out of earshot. "She had a letter with her," Josephine said. "An old one. The paper was yellow. She showed it to me because she wanted me to read it to her. She does not read English well. It was a letter her brother wrote but never sent. Her brother was a miner. He worked a claim near Bannock City in 1879. I did not need her to say the rest. I felt it coming the way you feel a storm before you see it. Her brother was killed that year," Josephine said, "in a gambling quarrel. The man who shot him was a cavalry lieutenant just out of the service. The man who shot him, Ruth." She swallowed. "The man who shot him was Ezra Calloway." I stood very still in the snow outside the little white church. My wedding ring was still warm from the minister's hand laying it on my finger. My husband was 20 feet away, laughing at something Dr. Wexford had said. A rare laugh, a laugh I had never heard before. And somewhere in the town behind me, a woman named Delphine Kowalski was sitting in a rented room with a letter 9 years old, waiting. I said, "Josie, how long is she staying?" Josephine said she is paid through Sunday, 4 more nights. I said, "Do not tell her I know." Josephine said I would not. I said, "Does Ezra know she is here?" Josephine said no, and I did not think it was my place to tell him. I thought it was yours." I took her hand. I squeezed it once. I walked to the wagon. I did not say anything to Ezra on the ride home. The mountain was white on both sides of the road. The horses blew steam. Ezra held the reins in his bare hands, which he had refused to wrap that morning, because he said a bridegroom should not shake hands in gloves. He was happy. I could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way he was sitting a little straighter than he had the week before. I looked at him, and I saw the man who had walked 4 hours through a blizzard to carry me home. I saw the man who had given me his coat. I saw the man who had said, "You are not heavy, you are exactly what you are supposed to be." And I understood, sitting next to him on that cold wagon seat, that I had not yet met all of him. That somewhere inside him was a room I had not opened. A room with a young brother in it, and a town in 1879, and 3 dead men, and a letter carried across the territory in the hands of a sister. I understood that I had just married a man with a secret as heavy as the one I had been carrying up the ridge in the snow. And I knew, without quite choosing, that I was not going to run from it. I was going to stay. I slid my hand across the wagon seat and put it over his. His fingers were cold and cracked from the frost. He looked down at my hand and then at my face, and his eyes asked a question he did not have words for. I did not have words either. I just held on, and the wagon went up the mountain, and the snow began to fall again. And somewhere below us, in the little town of Silver Creek, a woman named Delphine was sitting in a boarding house window with a letter on her lap, deciding what she was going to do next. But that, as I told you at the beginning, is the next part of the story. I did not sleep well that first night as a married woman. Ezra kept his word. He stayed in the front room. I stayed in the back. But the wall between us was thin, and I could hear him breathing, and I could hear the fire, and I could hear the wind working at the roof shingles. And underneath all of it, I could hear Josephine Hale's voice in the churchyard saying, "Delphine Kowalski." I said the name to myself in the dark. I said it the way a woman says a name she is going to have to carry for a while. Delphine Kowalski. The sister of a dead man. The sister of a man my husband had shot in the spring of 1879 in a mining town called Bannock City, before I had ever heard of Montana, before Ezra Calloway was a name on a page in the Pittsburgh Gazette, before any of this was mine to carry. I lay on my side, and I watched the slow, pale square of the window. Snow on the glass. Nothing beyond. I thought about the man in Pittsburgh standing in a church saying, "She is just too much." And I thought about the man on the other side of the wall saying, "You are exactly what you are supposed to be." And I thought that there are worse things a woman could be asked to carry than the truth about the man she has married. I decided lying there that I would not ask Ezra about it that first night. Not on our wedding night. Not while he was still happy in a way I had never seen him happy. I would give him a few more days of his own, and then I would go down the mountain alone and find Delphine Kowalski, and I would hear the story from her mouth before I heard it from his. Because whatever it was going to come to our door eventually. And a woman who has stood in a wedding dress and been made a fool of once in her life learns something. She learns that secrets do not keep. She learns to go find them before they come for her. I waited 3 days. For 3 days, I was a wife. I swept the cabin floor in the mornings. I put up a line of dried apples along the kitchen rafter. I took down Ezra's mending and I put it back whole. I watched him eat the things I cooked and say nothing about them, which I understood now was not rudeness. It was the highest compliment a man like Ezra was capable of paying. If the food was bad, he would have said so. Silence meant it was good. On the third morning, I said I need to go into town. I need thread and indigo for the curtains. Can I take the small mare? He looked at me across the table. He did not ask why I could not wait until he rode down with me on Saturday. He did not ask whether I was sure. He just nodded. Take the small mare, he said. She is slow, but she knows the road. Be back before dark. If the snow starts again, turn around. I do not care about thread. Do you understand me, Ruth? I understand, I said. He helped me saddle her. He tightened the girth himself. He put a wool scarf around my neck that had belonged, I suspected, to someone he had loved before me, though I did not ask. He stood at the head of the mare and looked up at me in the saddle and said quietly, Come back. I will, I said. I rode down the ridge. Silver Creek sat in a long, shallow bowl between two arms of the Sapphire Range. 2 streets, 1 bank, 1 church, 1 doctor, 1 boarding house, 2 saloons, and a general store with a brass bell over the door that rang too loud in the cold. I tied the mare at the rail in front of Josephine Hale's boarding house. My hands were stiff. My face was stiff. My heart was not stiff at all. Josephine was behind the counter, polishing a kerosene lamp. She looked up. She saw my face. She did not say hello. She is still here, Josephine said. Which room? Number 4, top of the stairs, turn left. She has been up there since breakfast. She has her meals sent up. She barely comes down. I climbed the stairs. The carpet was worn thin in the middle. A clock somewhere downstairs struck 11. I stood in front of room number 4. I made myself stand there for a full 10 seconds before I knocked. I wanted to be a woman who had chosen to knock on this door, not a woman who had been blown against it by a storm. I knocked twice. A voice from inside said, Come in. I opened the door. Delphine Kowalski was sitting in a wooden chair by the window. She was 31 years old. She was tall and narrow with dark hair, pulled back hard from a face that had high cheekbones and very dark eyes. Polished Josephine had told me downstairs the week before. Her family had come to the Montana mines in the late 1870s. She had grown up speaking 2 languages and trusting neither. She looked at me when I came through the door. She did not stand. She did not smile. But she did not look surprised either. You are his wife, she said. I am. I was wondering which it would be, she said. You or him? There was a second chair by the window. She did not offer it to me. I took it anyway. I sat down. I put my hands flat on my knees, and I looked at her. I am Ruth, I said. Ruth Calloway, now 3 days ago. I understand you have a letter. She studied me a long moment. I watched her eyes move across my face. I could see her deciding something. I could see her putting away one kind of conversation and choosing another. She reached into the bag at her feet and brought out a folded piece of paper. The paper was the color of old tea. It had been folded and unfolded so many times, the creases had gone soft. This is my brother's handwriting, she said. She put it on the small table between us. I did not pick it up. Not yet. I said I want you to tell me in your own words first. Then I will read it. Her mouth moved. I thought for a moment she was going to refuse. Then something in her gave way, a very small surrender. the kind a woman makes only when she has been holding something too long and is tired of the weight of it. She began to speak. My brother's name was Matthias, she said. He was 6 years older than me. Our parents died when I was 8. Cholera in the mining camps outside of Butte. After they died, Matthias raised me. He was 14. He took work in the mines. He fed me. He kept me in school until I was 12. He taught me to read English from a newspaper that was 2 months old because that was the only newspaper we had. He was not a good man, Mrs. Calloway. I want you to hear that from me before we go any further. He was not a good man. He drank. He gambled. He cheated at cards. He cheated at other things too. When I was 15, he hit me once for hiding $1 from him. I forgave him because he was all I had. I forgave him many things because he was all I had. In the spring of 1879, he was working a claim near Bannock. He came into town on a Saturday. There was a card game in the back room of a saloon called Rucker's. I know this because he told me about it in his last letter home, which he sent to me in Butte, where I was working as a seamstress. The letter came 2 weeks before he was killed. In it, he said, Dell, I am going to make enough at Rucker's this month to send you to the sister's school in Helena. I am going to do it one way or another. You tell me what kind of a man says one way or another, Mrs. Calloway. I will tell you. A man who has already decided to cheat. She stopped. She looked at her hands. When the news came that he was dead, I was 17 years old. I was told he had been shot in a quarrel over cards. I was told the shooter was a former cavalry lieutenant named Calloway. I was told there were 2 other men shot the same night. I was told the law did not pursue the matter because the witnesses said the shooter had come in after a boy had already been stabbed on the floor of the saloon, and the shooter was the boy's older brother, and no jury in the territory would have convicted him. I was told all of this by a sheriff in Butte who had no reason to lie to me, and I still spent 9 years hating the name Calloway. 9 years, Mrs. Calloway. 9 years of thinking about a man I had never seen. 9 years of telling myself that when I had enough saved, I would go find him, and I would look at him, and I would decide what to do with him. 4 months ago, I was going through my brother's trunk. My aunt had kept it all these years in her attic in Butte. I was going through it because I had finally saved enough money to come look for the man who killed him, and I thought there might be something in the trunk that would help me. A name, a face, a witness. I found this letter. She nodded at the paper on the table. It is in my brother's handwriting. It is dated the day before he died. It is not addressed to anyone. I think he wrote it because he knew. I think men who cheat at cards in mining towns in 1879 knew the way animals know. He did not send it because he did not know who to send it to. You read it now, Mrs. Calloway. I will wait. I picked up the letter. I opened it slowly. The folds were so soft, they felt like cloth. The ink was brown with age. It was dated March the 11th, 1879. It said, if anyone finds this, my name is Matthias Kowalski. I have a sister named Delphine who lives with our aunt in Butte. If something happens to me, tell her I did not die an honest man. Tell her I marked the cards tonight at Rucker's. Tell her I marked them 2 weeks ago, and I have been using them since. Tell her I lied to her about the money. Tell her there is no sister school in Helena. There never was. I was going to give her enough to make it look like something and keep the rest. Tell her I am sorry. Tell her I know I am going to get caught. You do this long enough, you get caught. I have watched it happen to better men than me. Tell her most of all, Do not go hunting the man who catches me. He will have a right to what he does. Do not carry my weight for me. I have carried it badly enough myself. Your brother Matthias. I read it twice. I put it down on the table. I looked across at Delphine, and I saw that she had turned her face to the window and was weeping without making any sound, the way a woman weeps when she has been practicing not making sound for most of her life. I did not say anything for a long time. I let her have her quiet. Then I said, "Why did you still come?" She did not look at me. "Because I had been hating him for 9 years," she said. "That is a long time to hate a man. You cannot just put it down because a piece of paper tells you to." I came because I needed to see his face. I needed to see whether he was a monster or a man. I thought if I saw him, I would know what to do. She finally turned her head. Her eyes were red, but her face was calm. "I have not decided yet," she said. "I want you to know that I am not sitting here telling you I forgive him. I am not sure I ever will. But I came to Silver Creek to kill a monster, Mrs. Calloway, and 4 days ago I found out he has a wife, and she walked 6 miles in a snowstorm to be with him, and something in me could not go the way I had planned. I want to meet him," she said. "That is all. I want to meet the man who shot my brother. I want him to know that I know the truth now. I want him to say my brother's name out loud. That is what I want. After that, I will go." I thought for a long time before I answered. "I said I will bring him to you." "No, I will do better than that. You will come up the mountain tomorrow afternoon. You will say what you came to say on his land in front of his house, in front of me. He will not hide from you. He will not make you come to him like a petitioner. You come up, and he will be standing there when you arrive. Does that suit you?" "It suits me," she said. I stood up. My legs were shaking, though I did not let her see it. At the door I stopped. I said, "Miss Kowalski, I am sorry about your brother." She did not turn around. She did not answer. But I saw her shoulders move once, a short, sharp shudder, and I understood that she had heard me. I closed the door behind me. I rode up the mountain in the fading afternoon light. The mare was slow. I was slower. My mind was not on the road. My mind was in that boarding house room with a letter on a table between 2 women who had both spent parts of their lives hating men they did not know. Ezra was splitting wood in the yard when I came into the clearing. He set the axe down. He walked out to meet me. He took the mare's reins. He looked up at me in the saddle, and whatever was on my face, he read it. I saw him read it. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not ask whether I had gotten the thread. He just said, "Come inside." I came inside. I sat at the kitchen table in my coat. He knelt and took off my boots himself. He put them by the stove to dry. He poured coffee into a tin cup and put it in front of me. He sat down across from me. He waited. I said, "Ezra, there is a woman in town. Her name is Delphine Kowalski. She is the sister of a man named Matthias Kowalski, who was killed in Bannock in the spring of 1879. He did not move. He did not blink. He did not look surprised. I said, "She has a letter. Her brother wrote it the day before he died. He confesses in it. He confesses to marking the cards. He says whoever catches him will have the right to do what he does. He says, 'Do not hunt the man.'" I said, "She is not here to kill you. She came here to kill you, and then she read the letter, and then she walked into this town, and now she does not know why she came. She wants to meet you. She wants you to say her brother's name out loud. That is what she asked for. She is coming up the mountain tomorrow afternoon. I said, Ezra, I need to hear it from you, all of it, before she arrives. He was quiet for a long time. He drank his coffee slowly. He set the cup down. He folded his hands on the table in front of him, and they were big, rough, scarred hands, and I watched them fold and unfold once, as if he was testing whether he could still trust them to behave. Then he told me. I had mustered out of the cavalry in December of 1878, he said. 3 years of service on the northern plains. I came home to our father's old homestead outside of Bannack. Our father had been dead 6 years by then. Our mother was dead, too. The only family I had left was my brother, Jonah. Jonah was 19. Jonah was the best thing our family ever produced. He was not like me. He was not hard. He laughed at everything. He loved horses the way other men love women. He was working a small claim up the creek from our father's old place, and doing well at it, honest well, the kind of well a patient man can do if he is willing to bend his back every day for 5 years. I had been home 3 months. It was a Saturday, the 11th of March, 1879. Jonah and I rode into Bannack for supplies. He wanted to buy a length of canvas to patch the roof of his cabin. We were going to ride home before dark. He said, Ezra, I am going to stop in at Rucker's. Just one hand. I have been lucky this month. I said, Jonah, do not. I do not like Rucker's. He laughed at me. He said, you do not like anywhere that has more than 3 men in it at once. I will meet you at the livery in 1 hour. I will buy you a beer with my winnings. I let him go. That is the part, Ruth, that I carry, not the rest. That part. I went to the general store. I bought flour and coffee and nails. I came back to the livery at the hour we had agreed on. He was not there. I waited 10 minutes. Then I heard the shouting. I walked to Rucker's. The doors were open. There was a crowd on the street and a crowd at the door, and I knew. I knew the way you know in a dream before you see a thing. I pushed through. There were 4 men around a table in the back room, 2 on their feet, 2 on the floor. My brother was one of the men on the floor. He had a knife in his side. He was bleeding onto the boards in a slow, steady way that a cavalry officer knows is the end. A man, later identified as Briggs, was the one holding the knife. He was still holding it. He had not yet decided to drop it. He turned when I came in. He smiled at me, Ruth. He smiled. He did not know who I was. He thought I was another spectator. I will remember his smile until the day I die. Matthias Kowalski was one of the men standing. He had not cut my brother. Briggs had. But Matthias had marked the cards. Matthias had set it up. Matthias had brought my brother into the trap because my brother had too much honest money in his pocket and not enough sense to refuse a friendly game. The third man was named Halloran. He was going for a pistol on the bar. I had my service revolver on my hip. I will tell you only this, Ruth. I did what a man who has just seen his brother gutted on a saloon floor does. I did it fast. I did it in the order I saw the threats. Halloran first because he was reaching for the gun. Briggs second because he still had the knife. Matthias third because he was trying to go out the back door. And I did not in that moment know whether he was running or going for help or going to come back and shoot me in the dark. 3 men died in the back room of Rucker's that afternoon. I got to my brother. I held him. He was still alive for about 4 minutes. He looked up at me. He had blood on his mouth. He was trying to smile because that is what he always did. He said, "Ezra, do not let this turn you into somebody else. Do not carry me that way. Promise me." I promised him. I lied to him. I had already turned into somebody else by the time he asked. A man does not shoot 3 other men in a saloon and walk out the man he was before. I rode out of Bannock that night with my brother wrapped in a canvas tarp across his saddle. I buried him the next morning on the rise above our father's cabin. I sat there for 3 days. I did not eat. I did not sleep. On the 4th day, I wrote a letter to the sheriff in Bannock giving my account. He wrote back 2 weeks later that no charges would be brought on the word of 6 witnesses. And then, Ruth, I did the thing I have been doing every day since. I came up this mountain. I built this cabin with my own hands. I trapped and I cut timber, and I did not go back down except when I had to. And I did not speak to another human being for longer than 10 minutes at a time for 9 years. Until one day a woman comes up the mountain. He stopped talking. The fire had burned down. Neither of us had moved to put on another log. The cabin was half in shadow. I reached across the table and I took his hand. His fingers were cold. I said, "Ezra, look at me." He looked at me. I said, "You did not kill an innocent man. You shot 3 guilty ones in the order a soldier would shoot them. You are not a saint, but you are not what you have been telling yourself either. Do you hear me?" He nodded. He did not trust his voice. I said, "Tomorrow she is coming up here, and you are going to do the thing you have not let yourself do for 9 years. You are going to say her brother's name out loud. You are going to say Matthias Kowalski. You are going to tell her you are sorry for her pain. You are not going to tell her you are sorry for what you did because you are not. And she does not want that kind of apology anyway. She wants to be seen. You are going to see her. Do you understand?" "I understand," he said. I said, "And after she goes, Ezra, you are going to come to bed. Our bed, the back room, because I am your wife, and 3 days is long enough, and I am done sleeping on the other side of a wall from a man who carried me out of a snowstorm." He looked at me for a very long moment. Then he said, "Yes, ma'am." It was the closest I had ever heard him come to laughing. Delphine came up the mountain the next afternoon on a hired horse wrapped in a gray wool cloak. Ezra was at the woodpile when he saw her come out of the trees. He set down the axe. He did not move to meet her. He waited. A man waiting for a judgment he has been waiting for 9 years does not run to meet it. She dismounted. She walked across the clearing. She stopped 6 feet from him, which I understood watching from the porch was the distance of a woman who had decided on the ride up that she was not going to be closer than 6 feet to him ever. He took off his hat. He said, "Miss Kowalski." She said, "Mr. Calloway." Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she reached into her cloak and took out the letter. She held it out. He took it. He read it slowly, moving his lips very slightly, because he was a man who read carefully and wanted to get it right. When he finished, he folded it. He held it out to her. She did not take it. "Keep it," she said. "I have memorized it." He put it in his coat. He looked her in the face. He said, "Your brother's name was Matthias Kowalski. He was killed in Rucker's Saloon in Bannock City on March 11th, 1879. He was standing when I came in. He was not the man who cut my brother, but he had marked the cards that brought my brother to that table. I shot him because I believed in that moment that he was going for help or for a gun. I do not know now whether I was right. I have thought about it for 9 years. I am sorry for your pain, Miss Kowalski. I am sorry that you were 17 years old when you got the news. I am sorry that you have carried this for 9 years and that part of what you were carrying was a lie about your brother that he himself could not bring himself to tell you while he was alive. He paused. He put his hat back on. He said, I cannot ask you to forgive me. I have no right to that. But I wanted you to know, Miss Kowalski, that I have carried him too. Every day of 9 years. I have carried all 3 of them. And now I will carry him with his right name because you have given me that much. Delphine stood very still. I watched from the porch. I did not move. I did not breathe. She looked at him for what must have been a full minute. Then she said one more thing, Mr. Calloway. Yes, my brother had a daughter. Ezra's hands, which had been at his sides, moved just slightly. A twitch. I saw it. She is 9 years old, Delphine said. Her name is Lucia. Her mother died when she was born. My brother never met her because he did not know about her until 2 months before he died, and by then he was already at the table at Rutgers every weekend, and I do not think he had the courage to be a father by then. She has been raised by my aunt in Helena. She does not know who her father was. I am not going to tell her. She is a happy child, Mr. Calloway. She likes to draw. She wants to be a school teacher. She paused. I am telling you this, she said, because you should know that there is a child in Helena who is alive and laughing and drawing pictures at a kitchen table while her father is in the ground. I am not telling you so that you will do anything. I do not want your money. I do not want your guilt. I want you to carry this too, Mr. Calloway. You asked for no forgiveness. Good. You will not get any today, but you will carry her name the way you carry his, because I have decided that this is what I came up this mountain for. Her name is Lucia Kowalski. Say it. Ezra said Lucia Kowalski. Delphine nodded once. Then she turned and walked back to her horse. She mounted without looking back. She rode out of the clearing and down into the trees, and the sound of the horse's hooves on the frozen ground faded slowly, and then there was nothing. Ezra stood in the yard for a long time with his hat in his hand. I came down off the porch. I walked out to him. I put my arms around him the way a woman puts her arms around a man who has just set something down for the first time in a very long time. He was shaking, not weeping, shaking. We stood in the yard until the shaking stopped. Then I took his hand and I led him into the cabin, and I closed the door behind us. That night, I did not sleep in the back room alone. I lay in our bed with him beside me, and I listened to him breathe. He fell asleep with his forehead against my shoulder, the way a man falls asleep only when the thing he has been guarding against has finally walked into his house and turned out to be smaller than he feared. I lay awake a long time after he was asleep because I was not finished thinking about Lucia Kowalski. I was not finished thinking about a 9-year-old girl in Helena who liked to draw. I was not finished thinking about $320 in a coffee tin under a loose floorboard in the front room, which was every cent Ezra Calloway had saved in 9 years on a mountain. I was not finished thinking about what a man does after he has finally said a dead man's name out loud if he wants to keep on being the man his brother asked him to be. I did not know, lying there in the dark next to my sleeping husband, that there was already a letter on its way from Helena to Silver Creek. A letter from a woman named Margaret Holloway. A letter that was going to split my life in two. I did not know that Silas Crane, who owned the timber company in the valley, had just finished drafting a document in his office in town. A document that had the word boundary on it and the seal of a man he had paid off in the territorial capital. A document that was going to be served on my husband within the week. I did not know that a child named Bennett Crane, the son of the man who would try to take our mountain, was already running a low fever in a small bedroom above the timber office. I did not know any of it yet. I only knew that my husband was asleep against my shoulder, and that his breathing was slow and even for the first night in nearly a decade, and that outside the window the snow had stopped falling, and the sky had opened, and the stars over the sapphire mountains were so bright and so cold and so indifferent that they looked like the eyes of something that had been watching us for a very long time and had finally decided tonight to let us rest. The first thing I want to tell you about the morning after Delphine Kowalski rode down the mountain is that I woke up and my husband was still in the bed. That may not sound like much to a man who has been married his whole life, but to a woman who had been left at an altar and who had slept on the other side of a wall from her own husband for 4 nights of her marriage, waking up with Ezra Calloway's arm across my ribs, felt like a small, quiet miracle. The kind of miracle a woman does not tell anyone about because she is afraid the telling will break it. He was still asleep. His face was turned toward mine. His beard was pressed against the pillow. The lines between his eyebrows, which I had come to think of as part of his face, were gone. They had been there in the snow. They had been there at the altar. They had been there while he cleaned his rifle, and when he walked in from the traps, and even when he slept sitting up in the chair by the fire. I had thought those lines were his. They were not. They were a weight. And last night, standing in the yard saying Matthias Kowalski's name out loud to a woman who had carried a letter for 9 years, he had finally put part of that weight down. I watched him sleep until the sky started to turn gray. Then I got up and went to make coffee. He came out of the bedroom 20 minutes later, buttoning his shirt. He looked at me by the stove. He did not smile. Ezra did not smile the way other men smiled, but something in the corner of his mouth was softer than it had been yesterday. He said, "You are up early." I said, "I have things to do." He sat at the table. I poured him coffee. He took it in both hands the way a man warms his hands on a cup. I said, "Ezra, I want to go down to town today." He looked up at me. I said, "I need to talk to Dr. Wexford. I have not been down since the wedding. I want him to know I am available if he needs a hand at the dispensary. My father was a druggist. I can read labels. I can mix a simple tincture. I can sit with a patient. If there is work for me in Silver Creek that is honest and useful, Ezra, I would like to do it." He did not answer right away. He drank his coffee. He looked out the window at the light coming up over the ridge. Then he said, "Ruth, I am a man who has kept a woman inside a cabin for the better part of a week because I was afraid of what was waiting for her in town. Yesterday, the worst thing in town rode up this mountain and looked me in the face, and I am still standing. I have no right to keep you from anything. You go down, you talk to Wexford, you come home when you come home." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Take the mare. Take the good coat. Take my rifle in the scabbard. I do not expect trouble. But the last time I let you ride up that road without a rifle, I found you face down in a drift, and I am not losing you twice." I almost laughed. I almost wept. I did neither. I drank my own coffee, and I put on my boots, and I rode down to Silver Creek. Dr. Cyrus Wexford was 64 years old. He had been the only physician within 40 miles of Silver Creek for 11 years. He had a long white beard and eyes the color of weak tea, and he had been a lawyer in St. Louis before he had been a doctor in Montana, which meant that he was one of the very few men in the territory who could read a contract as fast as he could read a fever. His office was one room behind the general store, a pine desk, a shelf of glass jars, an examination table covered in an oilcloth, a small stove, a map of the territory pinned to the wall with 7 pins. He stood up when I came in. He said, "Mrs. Calloway." I said, "Doctor." He came around the desk. He took both my hands in his, which surprised me. He looked at me the way a man looks at a thing he has been hoping to see. He said I was going to ride up the mountain this week to find you. I did not want to do it in front of Ezra, because what I have to say will hurt him, and he does not need to hear it from me, standing in his yard with a saddlebag over my shoulder. My stomach turned over once. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He sat opposite me. He folded his hands on the desk. And he told me about Silas Crane. Silas Crane owned the Crane Timber Company, which was the largest employer in Silver Creek and the second largest in this part of the territory. He had come to Montana in 1881 with money from a family in Ohio. He had bought 3,000 acres of valley floor for timber. He had bought 400 acres of river frontage. He had bought the mortgage on the general store and 2 of the 3 saloons. He was 48 years old, a widower, and the father of one 9-year-old son named Bennett, whom he loved in a way that Silver Creek found confusing because the rest of the time he was a man who loved nothing. For the last 2 years, Wexford said Silas Crane has been trying to buy the east face of your husband's mountain. He has made 3 offers. Ezra has refused all 3. The timber on that face is the best uncut pine within 50 miles of the railhead. Crane believes correctly that if he can get that timber, he can double his annual output for the next 6 years. Ezra will not sell. Ezra does not need the money. Ezra would rather chew his own arm off than watch Silas Crane put a logging crew on that ridge. Ezra has told him so in those words in front of witnesses in the bar at the Silver Spur in November. Crane is a patient man. He is also a man who does not lose. 2 weeks ago, a land surveyor came out of the territorial office in Helena. He did not stop in Silver Creek. He did not stop at Ezra's cabin. He went up the mountain alone with compass and chain, and he marked a new boundary line between Ezra's private holding and what he called unsurveyed public domain. That new line Mrs. Calloway runs about 300 yards inside where Ezra believes his east line runs. That 300 yards includes the best pine on the mountain. There is a document. I have seen a copy of it. It has the territorial seal on it. It is signed by a man named Halverson, who is an assistant surveyor general in Helena, and who has been for about 6 years on a private retainer from Silas Crane. I cannot prove the retainer in a court, but I know it. Half the territory knows it. Crane is going to serve that document on Ezra within the week. When he does, he will offer one final purchase price at half of what he offered last year, and he will say that if Ezra does not accept, he will begin legal logging on the 300 yards by the end of the month. Wexford stopped. He looked at me across the desk. He said, "Mrs. Calloway, I have fought men like Crane in courtrooms before. I know what it takes. It takes money. It takes time. It takes a lawyer in Helena with the stomach to go up against Halverson and the territorial office. Your husband does not have the money. I can give you the name of the lawyer. I cannot give you the money. I wanted you to know before the document arrives. Because Ezra, when it arrives, is going to do one of two things. He is going to sign it, or he is going to pick up that rifle of his and ride down the mountain and do something that will put him in a prison in Deer Lodge for the rest of his life. And I did not watch that man come back from 9 years on a mountain to see him throw it all away over 300 yards of pine. I sat in the chair for a long moment. Then I said, "Doctor, how long do I have?" He said a week, maybe less. I said, "Thank you. I need to think." He nodded. He did not push me. He was a man who had been a lawyer, and he knew that when a woman said she needed to think, the kindest thing a man could do was let her do it. I stood up. I put on my gloves. At the door, I stopped. I said, "Doctor, was there anything else?" He hesitated. Then he said, "There is one other thing, Mrs. Calloway, but it is a smaller thing, and it can wait." I said, "Tell me now." He said, "I have a colleague in Helena. Her name is Margaret Holloway. She is a nurse. She trained in field hospitals during the war, and she ran a military ward in Washington after it. She is 61 years old, and she is one of the finest practical medical minds I have ever corresponded with. She is setting up a small teaching situation at St. Peter's in Helena. She cannot give a formal certificate because the territory does not yet permit women to hold one, but she can give 6 months of training and a letter of reference, and I have written to her about you." I said, "About me?" I told her he said that there is a woman in Silver Creek whose father was a druggist who reads Latin off a bottle and does not panic in a sick room, who married a mountain man 3 weeks ago and still found time to sit with the widow Hollister's sick child for 2 hours yesterday afternoon because I was out at the Jorgensen place setting a broken leg. I did not remember telling him about the Hollister child. He must have seen her mother in town. I said, "Doctor, when will this letter come?" He said it may already be at the post office. I wrote to Margaret 4 weeks ago. Her reply is due any day. I stood at the door. In one morning, I had been told that the mountain my husband had built his whole adult self around was about to be taken from him, and that there was a door in Helena opening toward a life I had not dared to imagine a month ago. I said, "Dr. Wexford." "Yes." "Do not say a word of either of these things to my husband. Not yet. Not until I'm ready." He nodded once. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "I have been keeping other people's secrets in this town for 11 years. 1 more week will not strain me." I walked out of the dispensary into the cold. I did not ride straight home. I tied the mare in front of Josephine Hale's boarding house. I went inside. Josephine was in the kitchen kneading bread. Her sleeves were pushed up past her elbows, and there was flour on her cheek. She looked up. She saw my face. She said, "Oh, child, sit down." I sat at her kitchen table, and I told her what Wexford had told me. Not the letter from Helena. That was mine to carry alone for now. But the part about Silas Crane and the boundary line and the 300 yards of pine. Josephine wiped her hands on her apron. She sat down across from me. She looked at the table for a long time. Then she said, "Ruth, I have been in this town 11 years. I buried my husband here. I ran this boarding house through 2 bad winters and 1 good one. I know every man in Silver Creek by his boots, his wife, and his unpaid bill at the general store. And I will tell you something about Silas Crane that the doctor did not tell you." I leaned forward. She said, "Silas Crane loves exactly one thing in this world. His boy Bennett. He loves that child the way a man loves the last candle in the dark." His wife died bringing Bennett into this world, and I think Silas has been in a quiet argument with God ever since. You cannot shame that man. You cannot beg that man. You cannot outlawyer that man. But if you ever get the chance, Ruth, to stand between Silas Crane and the worst thing that could happen to Bennett, and he sees you do it, I promise you, he will become a different man in front of your eyes. I sat with that for a long moment. I said, Josie, that is not a plan. She said, no, honey, that is a prayer. I rode home at dusk. Ezra was waiting on the porch with a kerosene lantern already lit against the coming dark. He took the mare. He did not ask me what Wexford had said. He did not ask me why I had stayed so long. He looked at my face in the lantern light, and he read that I had brought something heavy down the mountain with me, and he chose in that moment to let me carry it a little longer until I was ready to set it down. That night at supper, I told him the first part. I told him only about the boundary line. I told him about Halverson. I told him about the document that was coming. I watched his hands while I talked. They did not move. They lay flat on either side of his plate. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Ruth. Yes. I am going to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it honestly. Do you want me to fight this? I said, what do you mean? He said, I mean, I have been on this mountain 9 years. I came up here to punish myself, and I stayed because I did not know how to come back down. Yesterday, a woman rode up here and made me say her brother's name out loud, and I slept through the night for the first full night in nearly a decade. I am not the same man I was a week ago, and I want to know before I decide what to do about Silas Crane, whether the mountain is what you married or whether it is what you inherited. Because if it is what you inherited, Ruth, I will sell it to him tomorrow morning for half of nothing, and I will walk down into Silver Creek with you on my arm, and we will start again, somewhere flatter. I looked at him across the table. I thought about it for a long time. Then I said, Ezra Calloway, I did not marry a mountain. I married you. But I also know that a man does not spend 9 years building something with his own 2 hands and then let another man take it from him with a forged piece of paper. If you let Silas Crane take those 300 yards because you are tired, you will spend the rest of your life wondering whether you were tired or whether you were beaten. I do not want to sleep next to that question, so I will tell you what I want. I want us to fight him. Not with the rifle. Not that way. With the other way. The slower way. The way that takes the rest of the winter and costs us money we do not have. I want us to fight him the way Dr. Wexford fights, and the way you used to fight when you wore a blue coat on the plains. I want you to put that coat back on Ezra. Not literally, but in the way you use your head. He looked at me for a very long time. Then he said, All right, Ruth. He stood up. He walked around the table. He bent down and kissed me on the top of the head, which was something he had not done before, and which I understood was a thing he was going to do for the rest of our lives. He said, I will ride to Helena Thursday. Wexford will give me the name of the lawyer. We will see what a forged line costs a man like Halverson when a cavalry officer and a small-town doctor go through his files. I said, Ezra. Yes, we do not have money for a lawyer in Helena. He said we have $320 in a coffee tin under the floorboard in the front room. I said, I know. He said, we have a mountain. We will use what we have. I said nothing about the $320. I said nothing about what I had already started to think about it standing in the yard last night with my arms around a shaking man. I said nothing about Lucia Kowalski and Helena. I let him think we were going to spend the money on a lawyer. I was not yet ready to tell him what I thought we were really going to spend it on. Tuesday, I went back down to Silver Creek. It was cold. The sky was gray iron. The road was rutted. The mare walked carefully, and I let her take her time. I went to Wexford's office first. He handed me a letter without a word. I opened it in the chair across from his desk. It was from Margaret Holloway in Helena. Her handwriting was small and sharp. She said she had read Wexford's letter about me. She said she was willing to take me on for 6 months beginning the 1st of July. She said she could not pay me because St. Peter's did not pay its trainees, but she could feed me and house me and teach me. She said at the end of 6 months, I would be as competent as any graduate nurse in the territory and better than most. She said that if I was the woman Wexford had described, I should come. I read the letter twice. I folded it. I put it inside my coat. I looked up at Wexford. I said, "Doctor, I do not know what to do with this yet." He said, "Mrs. Calloway, you are not required to know yet. You are required only to keep it safe and to read it again when your life is quieter." I said, "My life is not going to be quieter for a while." He said, "No, I do not suppose it is." I left Wexford's office and I walked down Main Street toward Josephine's boarding house. I was going to take a cup of coffee with her and ride home. I did not make it to the boarding house. Halfway down the block, I heard shouting. It came from the timber company office, a 2-story wood frame building with a heavy oak door and glass windows painted with the words Crane Timber Company in gold leaf. The door flew open. A man came running out. He was not wearing a coat. He was a clerk I had seen once before behind a counter. His face was the color of old paper. He ran across the street to the general store. He came out again 30 seconds later with the storekeeper's wife, a heavy-set woman named Mrs. Olson, who had nursed 2 of her own children through diphtheria and was known in town as a level head. Mrs. Olson was already running. I caught the clerk's sleeve as they came back toward the office. I said, "What is it?" He said, "The boy." "Bennett, Mr. Crane's boy. He is upstairs. He has been sick since yesterday. He has gone into a fit. His father cannot wake him." I said, "Where is Dr. Wexford?" The clerk said, "At the Jorgensen place." "Broken leg. He rode out an hour ago. He will not be back until dark." I stood in the street. I thought about Josephine's kitchen and her flower on her cheek, and the word she had used. Prayer. I thought about 300 yards of pine. I thought about a forged boundary line. I thought about a 9-year-old boy in a bedroom above a timber office in a fit with a father who could not wake him. I pushed past the clerk. I walked into the Crane Timber Company office. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, which was not something I had done easily in several years. Silas Crane was on its knees beside a small iron bed. Bennett was on the bed. He was a thin boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's fine bones. His skin was the color of wet chalk. His eyes were rolled up under his lids. His body was jerking in small, sharp rhythms. His arms rigid, his jaw locked so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. Silas looked up when I came in. He did not recognize me for a moment. I saw him not recognize me. Then he did. His face changed in a way I will remember for as long as I live. He said, "Mrs. Calloway." He said it like a question. I said, "How long has he been like this?" 6 minutes. "Has he done this before?" "Never." "He was hot all last night. He was hot this morning. I thought it was a cold. He was drawing pictures at the table after breakfast. Then he went upstairs to lie down. Then Hawkins came and said the boy was shaking. I came up, and he was already like this. Any chills before the heat? Yes. Yesterday. He was cold for an hour by the stove and could not get warm. I put my hand on Bennett's forehead. It was burning. Not a child's fever, a killing fever. 105, maybe more. I put 2 fingers against his throat. His pulse was running fast and thin. I knew what this was. It was the same thing that had taken the youngest Olsen child 2 winters ago, and 3 men on my father's block in Pittsburgh the summer I was 15. It was the kind of fever that had crossed the oceans in ships and come up the rivers in steamboats and hidden itself in the muddy water of mining creeks. It was a marsh fever. A bad one. I said, Mr. Crane, listen to me very carefully. He looked up at me from the floor. I said your son has malarial fever. It comes in cycles. The convulsion is from the heat. We have to break the heat or we will lose him. Dr. Wexford has quinine in his dispensary across the street. I know where it is kept. I'm going to go get it. While I'm gone, I want you to do exactly 3 things. Strip him to his shirt. Soak 2 towels in the coldest water you have. Wrap one around his chest and one around his thighs. Do not put them on his face. Do not put him in a tub. Wrap and wait. I will be back in 4 minutes. He said, Mrs. Calloway. I said, do it now, Mr. Crane. He did it. I ran down the stairs. I ran across the street. The general storekeeper let me into the side door of Wexford's dispensary with a key he kept for emergencies. I went to the second shelf. I took down the glass jar labeled Cinchona officinalis. I took down a smaller jar labeled laudanum. I took a stone mortar. I took a clean muslin square and a graduated glass. I ran back across the street. I went up the stairs. Bennett had stopped jerking. That could mean 2 things, and only one of them was good. He was breathing. His mouth was slack. I ground the cinchona bark in the mortar. I measured by eye. My father had shown me how to do this in a back room on Liberty Avenue when I was 11 years old. I strained the powder through the muslin. I mixed it with 2 ounces of warm water from the kettle on the bedroom stove. I added a drop of the laudanum, no more, because he was a child. I lifted his head. I poured it between his lips in small amounts. I watched his throat. He swallowed. Twice. 3 times. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed, and I waited. Silas Crane was on the other side of the bed, on his knees, holding his son's hand. He did not look at me. He said quietly, "Is he going to live?" I said, "Mr. Crane, I do not know. He is a strong boy. The dose was right. If he gets through the next hour without another convulsion, he will probably live. I am not going to lie to you. I will not lie to you tonight of all nights." He said, "You came running. You came up these stairs. You did not have to." I said, "I am a druggist's daughter, Mr. Crane. I have never in my life walked past a sick child." He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Mrs. Calloway, why are you being kind to me?" I said, "Because you are a father in a room with a sick boy. There is nothing else in this room right now." He looked down at his son. I sat with them for the next 18 hours. Bennett made it through the first hour, then the second. The fever began to drop in the third hour. By midnight, he was breathing evenly. By 3 in the morning, the fever had broken enough that he was sweating, which is the good sweat, the sweat a body gives up when it has decided to live. Silas Crane did not leave the room. He did not eat. He did not drink. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall. At some point in the long middle of the night, he began to talk. He did not talk about timber. He did not talk about boundary lines. He did not talk about his wife, though I had expected he might. He talked about his son. He talked about the first time Bennett had caught a fish and how Bennett had cried because the fish was scared. He talked about Bennett's drawings, which he kept in a drawer in his desk, and which he had never shown anyone because a timber baron is not supposed to keep his child's drawings in a drawer. He talked about the fact that Bennett was afraid of the dark and that every night Silas left a lamp burning low in the hallway because his son could not sleep without it. I listened. I did not say much. There was nothing to say. At some point near dawn, he stopped talking. Then he said, without looking at me, Mrs. Calloway, "I have a document in my desk downstairs." I said, "I know." He said, "You knew?" I said, "Yes, Mr. Crane." He said, "And you came up the stairs anyway?" I said, "Yes." He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I am going to burn it this morning." I said, "Mr. Crane, do not burn it because you owe me something. Burn it because it is wrong. If you burn it because of me, you will resent me in a year, and you will find another way. Burn it because you know, sitting in this room, that a man who forges a boundary line is not the man your son thinks you are." He did not answer for a long while. Then he said, "You are a dangerous woman, Mrs. Calloway." I said, "No, Mr. Crane. I am a tired woman. There is a difference." At 7 in the morning, Bennett opened his eyes. He looked at his father. He said, "Pa." Silas Crane made a sound I will not try to describe. It was the sound a man makes who has been told he can keep the only thing he values in the world. Bennett looked over at me. He said, "Who is the lady?" Silas said, "This is Mrs. Calloway. She is a nurse. She made you well." Bennett looked at me gravely the way 9-year-old boys look when they are being polite. He said, "Thank you, ma'am." I said, "You are welcome, Bennett." He closed his eyes again. He was asleep before his head had settled back on the pillow. This time, the good sleep. The sleep of a body that has decided to come home. Dr. Wexford rode in at 8:30. He came up the stairs 2 at a time despite his 64 years and the 12-hour ride from the Jorgensen place. He examined Bennett. He looked at the empty muslin on the bedside table. He looked at the cinchona bottle. He looked at me. He said, "Mrs. Calloway." I said I did what my father would have done. He said, "You did what a better man than your father would have done. Your father was a druggist. You are something else." Silas Crane walked me downstairs at 9 in the morning. We stopped in the front office. His desk was in the corner. There was a sealed envelope on it with my husband's name on the front in heavy black ink, and the red wax seal of the territorial office pressed into the flap. He picked up the envelope. He walked to the stove in the corner of the office. He opened the stove door. He dropped the envelope in. We watched it burn. He said, "I will write to Halverson and Helena this afternoon. I will tell him his services to my company are no longer required. I cannot undo the forgery he has already committed on paper I do not possess. But I can promise you, Mrs. Calloway, that no surveyor working for Crane Timber Company will ever set foot on your husband's mountain again. I will write it into my will if you would like me to." I said, "Mr. Crane, your word will be enough." He nodded once. Then he said, "Mrs. Calloway, one more thing. Yes. My wife, when she died, left a small sum for the poor of this town. It has been sitting in the bank for 9 years because no one in this town, including me, has been willing to administer it honestly. There is $400 in that account. I would like you to have the use of it. Not for yourself. I know you will not take money for yourself. For a dispensary in Silver Creek, a small one, for the poor. I will match the sum every year for the rest of my life, so long as you are the one running it. I stood in the office of the man who had 40 hours earlier been preparing to steal my husband's mountain. I said, "Mr. Crane, that is a great deal to decide in one morning." He said, "Mrs. Calloway, I have not decided anything in one morning. I decided it at 3 o'clock this morning while you were pouring cinchona down my son's throat, and I have been looking for a way to say it ever since." I looked at him. I said, "Let me think about it." He said, "Take as long as you need." I rode up the mountain at 10 in the morning. I had been gone almost a full day. I had not sent word. I had not had the chance. I did not know whether Ezra had come down looking for me or whether he had stayed home, trusting me in a way that he had not trusted anyone since 1879. I came out of the trees into the clearing in front of our cabin. He was not at the woodpile. He was not on the porch. The door was open. I dismounted. I walked up the steps. I went inside. He was sitting in the chair by the fire. He had a rifle across his knees. The rifle was clean and oiled, which meant he had cleaned it recently, which meant he had been sitting there, I understood, for most of the night. He looked up when I came in. His face was the face of a man who had been preparing all night to do a thing he had promised not to do. He said, "Ruth." I said, "Ezra, put the rifle down." He looked at me. He looked at my coat, which had the mark of a 9-year-old boy's fever on the sleeve. He looked at my hair, which had come loose from its pins. He looked at my face, which I knew was gray with exhaustion. He put the rifle on the floor. I walked across the room. I knelt down in front of him, which was not easy with my knees, but which felt like the right shape to take in that moment. I put my hands on his. I said, "Silas Crane burned the document this morning." In front of me. In his own stove. His boy was sick last night. I sat with the boy. The boy lived. There is no boundary line. There will be no logging crew. There will be a dispensary for the poor of Silver Creek, and Silas Crane is going to pay for it, and I am going to run it. He stared at me. He said, "Ruth." I said, "There is one more thing." I took the letter from Margaret Holloway out of my coat. I put it in his hand. I said, "Read it." He read it. He read it twice because he was a careful man. He looked up at me. He said, "Ruth." "How long?" I said, 6 months, beginning the 1st of July. I would be gone until Christmas. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Ruth." "Yes." "When you came down out of Pittsburgh, you came down with 1 trunk and 3 dresses and a Bible. You did not come down out here to sit in a cabin and mend my shirts for 30 years. I have known that since the first night when I saw you try to walk 6 miles in the snow rather than go back to the train station. You have work to do. You go to Helena. You do your work. You come home at Christmas." I said, "Ezra, 6 months is a long time." He said, "Ruth, I waited 9 years for you. I can wait 6 months." He pulled me up against him. I put my face against his shoulder. I did not weep. I had used up my weeping on a 9-year-old boy. But I stayed there against his shoulder for a long time, and he held me, and outside the window, the snow began to come down again, soft this time. Not the hard kind, the kind that settles on the roof and stays. March came and went. April broke the ice on the creek. In May, Ezra told me he was going to Helena. He said it at breakfast. He did not look up from his coffee. He said, "Ruth, I need to take a trip." I said, "Where?" He said, Helena. 3 days. I will leave Thursday and be back Saturday night. I said, for what? He looked up. He looked at me for a long moment. He said, I am going to take the money in the coffee tin under the floorboard. All of it. $320. I am going to open an account at the First National Bank of Helena in the name of Lucia Kowalski. I am going to name her aunt as trustee. I am going to instruct the bank that the money is to pay for her schooling until she is 18 and that no one is ever to tell her where it came from. He paused. He said, I want to do this with your permission, Ruth. It is our money now, not mine. You can say no, and I will not go. I will not do this behind your back. But I cannot sleep in this bed with you and know that I have not done it. Do you understand me? I understood him. I said, Ezra, take 400. Silas Crane will cover the dispensary. We do not need the extra 80. Give her enough to reach 18 without worry. He looked at me. His mouth did something that was not quite a smile, but was closer than most of his smiles got. He said I married above my station. I said, no, Ezra. You married at it. He rode out Thursday morning before dawn. I stood on the porch with a lantern and watched him disappear down the ridge. The spring air was still cold. The mare made slow, careful sounds on the frozen mud. He came back Saturday night just after dark. He was tired. He was quiet. He ate supper without saying much. Then he set a small envelope on the table in front of me. It was the bank receipt. He said the aunt is a good woman. I did not meet the child. I stood across the street from the boarding school and I watched her come out for the afternoon walk with the other girls. She is tall for 9. She has dark hair like her father did. She was laughing with another girl. She was carrying a drawing pad under her arm. He stopped. He looked at his hands. He said, I did not speak to her. I will not speak to her. But Ruth, I wanted you to know. She was laughing. I came around the table. I sat on his lap. The chair held as it had held before. I said, Ezra, your brother would be proud of you. He did not answer right away. Then he said, I do not know if that is true, but I think maybe tonight I can sleep without asking him. He did sleep that night, deeply, without moving. I lay awake beside him for a long time because I could not stop watching a man finally at peace. June came on fast that year. The snow was gone from the valley by the first week. The Sapphire Range still held white at the peaks, but Silver Creek itself turned green almost overnight, the way high country does when it remembers how. I was 10 days away from riding to Helena. I was packing. I was writing lists. I was teaching Mrs. Olson, the storekeeper's wife, how to run the dispensary in my absence, because I had taken Silas Crane's money, and I had taken his word, and I had opened the doors of the Silver Creek dispensary for the poor 3 weeks before, and I could not simply close them when I left. It was the 5th of June when the first wagon came into town. I was at the dispensary when Dr. Wexford pushed the door open. His face was gray. He said, Mrs. Calloway. A family just came in on the Bannock Road, an immigrant train. 6 wagons camped at the river crossing last night. 2 of them drank from the creek. There is typhoid in the camp. The oldest daughter is already dead. The mother is too weak to stand, and Mrs. Calloway, 3 of the Silver Creek children, were down at that river yesterday afternoon. I stood up. I said, which children? He said the Hanson twins, the Olson youngest, the Peterson boy. Bennett Crane. I said, Bennett. He said, yes. I sent a rider to the mountain. The boy got there in 2 hours. He told Ezra what was happening. He told him the doctor had said it might be very bad. Ezra came down that same afternoon. He came down in his bear coat and his old cavalry boots with a rifle he did not need across his back out of simple old habit, and he walked into the dispensary and he said, Ruth, what do you need? I said, clean water. Buckets of it. I need the kettle going day and night. I need someone strong to lift the sick into beds. I need a man who will not panic. He said, you have him. He did not leave the dispensary for 5 days. The fever came fast. It came hard. By the second night, we had 9 patients in the dispensary and the Olson parlor and Josephine Hale's boarding house. Dr. Wexford took the worst ones. I took the children. I took Bennett Crane. Silas Crane brought him in himself on the second morning, carrying the boy across his arms the way a man carries a wounded soldier off a field. Silas did not speak. He laid Bennett on the cot I had waiting, and he looked at me, and everything that was in him in that moment I have carried since. He said, Mrs. Calloway. Please. I said, Mr. Crane. I will do everything I know how to do. He said, I know you will. I will not tell you everything about those 5 days. Some things are between a nurse and the people she could not save, and they do not belong in the telling. I will tell you this. On the 3rd night, the Peterson boy died in my arms. He was 7 years old. His mother was beside me, and she did not make a sound when he went. She just took his hand, and she put it against her mouth, and she held it there. I sat with her for 20 minutes without speaking. Then I got up, and I went to the next bed, because there was another child there, and that child was still fighting. That child was Bennett Crane. His fever broke on the 4th morning. On the 5th day, the last of the immigrant fathers died at Dr. Wexford's examination table. We had lost 3 in total. We had saved 16. 16 of the 19 we had taken in. Wexford told me later that he had never in 40 years of medicine seen a better result in a typhoid outbreak in a town that size. He also told me quietly that he had never seen a woman work harder or sleep less. On the 5th evening, when the last of the dangerous fevers had broken and the Hanson twins were sitting up asking for bread, I walked out of the dispensary into the June dusk. I stood on the wooden sidewalk in front of the building. The air was warm for the first time in weeks. The sky over the sapphires was a color I did not have words for. My legs went out from under me. I did not fall all the way. Ezra was behind me before I hit the planks. He had been 2 steps behind me for 5 days. He caught me around the waist. He did not speak. He picked me up the way he had picked me up in the snow 5 months earlier, and he carried me across the street to Josephine Hale's boarding house, and he climbed the stairs, and he laid me on the bed in the small room at the top of the house that Josephine kept for guests. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He put his hand on my hair. I could not speak. I could not lift my arms. I was emptier than I had ever been in my life, but it was a different emptiness than the one I had carried out of Pittsburgh. That emptiness had been the emptiness of not being wanted. This emptiness was the emptiness of having been used all the way down for a purpose I had chosen. They are not the same. Ezra did not turn up the lamp. He did not bring water. He did not ask me whether I needed anything. He understood, as he understood most things, that I needed nothing in the world at that moment except to be seen. He said, Ruth, look at me. I opened my eyes. He said you saved 16 people in 5 days. You lost 3. Dr. Wexford has been a doctor for 40 years, and he told me tonight downstairs that he has never seen a better hand in a plague. You saved Bennett Crane's life for the 2nd time in a season. You saved the Hanson boys. You saved the Olsen girl. You saved a woman named Hannah Lindholm who came off that immigrant train with a fever so high. Wexford wrote her name down in his book for the burial notice before you ever got to her. You saved her Ruth. She is sitting up tonight eating broth. He paused. His voice was very steady. He said, "You are going to Helena in 4 days. You are going to become the nurse you are already on your way to becoming. You are going to come back to me at Christmas, and we are going to have 30 years together, if God allows it. And you are going to save more lives in this valley than Dr. Wexford and I combined could ever have done without you. But Ruth." He put his forehead against mine. I felt his breath on my face. He said, "Tonight, I do not want to think about 4 days from now. I do not want to think about Helena. I do not want to think about 6 months. I have given you to the work Ruth and I will give you again and again and again, because I understand now that the work is what you are for. But tonight, Ruth, you are not the nurse of Silver Creek. Tonight, you are my wife. Tonight, I am not letting the world have you. Tonight, I am having you." He kissed my forehead. He said, "I'm having you tonight." I did not have the strength to answer with words. I took his hand. I brought it to my face. I held it there. He lay down beside me. He did not take off his boots. He did not take off his coat. He wrapped himself around me the way a man wraps himself around the only thing in the world he is sure of, and he held me like that while I fell asleep. The last thing I remember of that night was his breath on the back of my neck and the sound of Josephine's clock striking 9 somewhere downstairs. I slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, he was still there. He had not moved. His eyes were open. He had been watching me sleep the entire night because he was not going to miss 1 hour of the last 4 days he would have me before Helena. That was the night. That was what he said. And I have told you because you should know that there was a man in this country in 1887 who understood that a woman could belong to her work and to him both, and that neither claim had to make the other smaller. There are not many men like that. I had the luck to marry one. I rode to Helena on the 9th of June. Ezra took me as far as the stage station. He did not come with me all the way because we had agreed, both of us, that a goodbye should be clean, and that a goodbye dragged out for 2 days on the road is worse than a goodbye at a station gate. He helped me down from the wagon. He handed my trunk to the stage driver. He put a small leather pouch in my hand. I said, "What is this?" He said, $15 for emergencies. Do not spend it on anything else. I said, "Ezra, I do not need." He said, "Ruth, take the money. Let a man send his wife to Helena with money in her pocket." I took the money. He said, "Write me every week." I said, "I will." He said, "Ruth, yes, come home at Christmas." "I will, Ezra. I promise you I will." He did not kiss me at the station. He did not touch me at all. He just looked at me for a long moment, and he nodded once, and he turned and walked back to the wagon without looking over his shoulder, because Ezra Calloway understood that a man who looks back at a station gate is a man who is asking his wife not to go. I watched him drive out of the station yard. The mare was slow. He did not hurry her. Then I got on the stage and I rode to Helena. Margaret Holloway was 61 years old, 5 feet tall, and the closest thing to a general I have ever seen in a skirt. She met me at the Helena Depot in person. She looked me up and down once. She said, "Mrs. Calloway." I said, "Miss Holloway." She said, "Cyrus Wexford told me you could read Latin, mix a cinchona tincture, and hold a 9-year-old boy's hand through a malarial fit without blinking. Is that accurate?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Good. Then we will not waste each other's time. Come with me." We walked the 3 blocks to St. Peter's together. She did not slow down for me. I kept up. By the time we reached the hospital door, I understood that the 6 months ahead of me were going to be harder than anything I had done in my life, and that I was going to love every day of them. Ezra's first letter arrived 11 days later. It was 4 lines long. "Ruth, I do not know how to write letters. The mare is getting fat on spring grass. I planted the garden you drew me. I miss you. Ezra." I read it 3 times. I sat down on the narrow cot in the nurses' dormitory at St. Peter's, and I read that letter 3 times, and I understood that I was the luckiest woman in the territory of Montana. I wrote him back that night. 4 pages. The second letter from him came 2 weeks after that. It was 6 lines. He wrote about the peas in the garden. He wrote that he had gone down to Silver Creek and taken coffee with Silas Crane at the Silver Spur, because Silas had asked him to, and that they had talked about timber prices for 40 minutes, and neither man had mentioned a boundary line. By the 4th letter, he was writing a full page. By the 6th, he was writing 2. By the 12th, he was writing things like Ruth. The bluebird came back to the tree outside the kitchen window. I think it is the same one from last year. I watched it for an hour this morning and did not get any work done, and I am not sorry. I saved every letter. I still have them. 18 letters in 6 months from a man who had not written a letter to anyone in 9 years. In Helena, I learned. I learned to set a clavicle. I learned to read a pulse in a dying child. I learned to tell a woman in labor when to push and when to breathe, and when very gently to stop pushing, because the cord had come down before the head. Margaret Holloway taught me these things the way she taught everything, which was by standing behind me and saying, "Do it, and I will tell you afterward what you got wrong." I got a lot wrong the 1st month. I got less wrong the 2nd. By the 4th month, Margaret let me run the women's ward alone on Tuesdays and Thursdays. By the 5th month, I knew. I knew on a Tuesday morning in early November. I was bending over a patient to check a suture, and the room turned for a second. I straightened up. I walked to the wash basin. I put cold water on my face. I counted backward in my head. I counted to 10 weeks. I sat down on the wooden stool beside the basin. I put my hand on my stomach. I had not told Ezra I thought something was different when I left. I had not known for sure. I had put it aside the way a woman puts aside a question she is not ready for, because I was a nurse in training, and I did not have room for another change. Now there was no putting aside. I was going to have a child. I did not write to tell him. I wanted to say it to his face. I wanted to see the shape of him when he heard it. I kept working. I kept writing weekly letters that did not mention the one thing that had changed everything. Margaret Holloway figured it out by the 7th month of my pregnancy, which was the 6th month of my training, because Margaret Holloway had figured out every pregnancy that had ever walked past her. She did not lecture me. She adjusted my duties. She took me off the lifting work and put me on records in teaching. She said, "You are going to make a fine nurse, Mrs. Calloway, and a fine mother, and if you tell anyone I said so, I will deny it." I loved her. On the 18th of December, 1887, I stepped off the stage at Silver Creek. The snow was coming down soft. The sapphire mountains behind the town were white again. The little white church was still standing. The brass bell on the general store rang when a man pushed the door open, and the sound carried across the street to the depot the way I remembered it. Ezra was waiting by the wagon. He saw me. He did not move for a moment. Then he walked across the wooden platform, and he stopped 3 feet from me, and he looked at me. He said, "Ruth." I said, "Ezra." His eyes dropped to my coat. I had a heavier coat than the one I had left in. The coat did not lie. I was almost 6 months along, and a woman at 6 months does not hide it in a wool coat. He looked back up at my face. He said, "Ruth." I said, "Ezra." I was going to tell you in the wagon so that nobody else would be watching, but I see I am a little late for that. He did not say anything. He put both his hands on my face. He put his forehead against mine. He said, "When?" I said, "March, I think. Maybe the first week." He said, "Ruth." I said, "I know." He lifted me into the wagon. He did not pick up the trunk. Josephine Hale's boy came out from the boarding house and loaded it for us, and I did not even realize it until we were halfway up the mountain, because Ezra had not let go of my hand the entire way. He was born at 10 minutes past 4 in the morning on the 29th of March, 1888. Margaret Holloway had ridden down from Helena a week before. Dr. Wexford was there. Josephine Hale was there. Ezra was not in the room at the moment of the birth, because Margaret had told him in the tone of a cavalry general that he would be of more use splitting wood in the yard than hovering in the cabin. He split wood for 8 hours that night. When he came in at dawn, there was enough wood in the yard to see us through the next winter. Margaret met him at the door. She put the bundle in his arms. She said, "Mr. Calloway, your son." Ezra looked down. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "Ruth." "What do we name him?" I was sitting up in bed, very tired and very happy in the back room of the cabin. I had thought about the name for months. I had waited to tell Ezra the way I had waited to tell him about the pregnancy, because some names a woman wants to give a man in his own home. I said, "I want to name him Jonah." Ezra closed his eyes. He stood in the doorway with the baby in his arms, and he closed his eyes, and he did not say anything for a full minute. I have thought about that minute many times in the years since. I have come to believe that a man who has carried a dead brother for 9 years needs a minute when a new life is handed to him and given that brother's name to put some things down that he will never pick up again. Finally, he opened his eyes. He said, "Jonah Calloway." I said yes. He said, "It is a good name, Ruth." He brought the baby over to the bed. He laid him beside me. He sat down on the edge of the mattress and he put one large cracked hand on the top of his son's head, and he said quietly to the baby, to me, or to a young man buried above an old cabin outside Bannock City in 1879. I am not sure which. Welcome home. Epilogue. What came after? Dr. Wexford lived 8 more years after that spring. He died in his office chair in the winter of 1896, with a copy of my first formal license pinned to the wall behind him. Montana Territory became Montana State in 1889, and by 1894, the new state legislature allowed practical nurses to be certified by examination. I took the examination in Helena. I was the second woman in the state to pass it. Margaret Holloway was the first. Silas Crane kept his word. He paid into the Silver Creek Dispensary every year until he died in 1909. By then, it was no longer a dispensary. It was a small hospital with 6 beds, and his will left it enough money to add 10 more. Bennett Crane grew up to be a lawyer in Helena, a quiet man who sent us a card every Christmas for 30 years, and who, when he was 19, came up the mountain one summer afternoon and asked if he could call me Aunt Ruth. I said yes. He did for the rest of my life. Delphine Kowalski went back to Butte. She wrote me once 2 years after she had come up the mountain. She said she had taken in her brother's daughter, Lucia, and was raising her as her own. She said Lucia had started at the sister's school in Helena on a scholarship from a donor who would not give his name. Delphine wrote, "I know who it is, Mrs. Calloway. I know who it is, and I will not say it because I think the man who did it needs it to be secret in order to carry it. But tell your husband, if you like, that the girl he thinks about is drawing pictures every day. Tell him she wants to be a school teacher. Tell him she is happy," I told him. He did not say anything. He just nodded once and went out to the woodpile and split wood for a long time. Lucia became a school teacher in Missoula. She never knew who had paid for her education. That was how Ezra wanted it. I honored his wish while he was alive. I write it now because he has been gone 7 years, and Lucia is 43 years old, and I think the living have a right to know who loved them from a distance, even when the loving was done in silence. Ezra Calloway died in October of 1919. He was 68 years old. He died in our bed in the cabin he had built with his own hands on the east face of a mountain he had refused across a lifetime to sell to any man at any price. He had been a father for 31 years. He had been my husband for 32. In the last week of his life, he asked me 3 things. He asked me to bury him on the rise above our garden, where he could see the Sapphire Range in the morning light. I did. He asked me to tell Jonah that he had been proud of him every day. I did. And he asked me on the last morning, very quietly, to lie down beside him. I did that too. I lay down beside him the way he had lain down beside me in Josephine Hale's boarding house 32 years before, and I held him the way he had held me then, and he went to sleep, and he did not wake up. I am 78 years old as I write this. I live in the cabin still. My son Jonah Calloway, who is himself 47 years old now, and a doctor in Missoula, comes up to see me on Sundays when the weather allows. I still run the Silver Creek Hospital 2 days a week, because Margaret Holloway taught me, and because my father taught me before her, that a woman who can read Latin off a bottle in candlelight does not get to retire until the candlelight fails. I want to tell you one more thing before I close this book. When I was 29 years old, a man in Pittsburgh told me I was too much to be loved. He was wrong. A man in Montana told me I was exactly what I was supposed to be. He was the only man who ever saw me clearly, and he saw me before he met me through 4 lines in a newspaper column written by a woman too tired to lie. That is the story. That is all of it. If you are a woman who has been told you are too much, I want you to understand something. The man who said that to you was looking at you through his own smallness. He measured you with the only ruler he had, which was the short ruler of his own fear. There is a longer ruler. It exists. It is rare. It belongs to men who have been broken by life and put back together by their own hands, and who recognize when they see it the shape of another person who has done the same. If you are a man reading this and you have ever looked at a woman and thought she was too much, I want you to put this book down and think about whether the problem was the woman or the ruler. And if you are young and you are not sure whether love exists in the shape the old stories promised, I want to tell you this. It does. It is quieter than the stories. It is heavier than the stories. It will ask more of you than the stories ever said it would. But it is real. It walked 4 hours through a Montana blizzard in January of 1887 to find me, and it did not put me down until I was home, and it stayed with me for 32 years. And the weight I carried up that ridge in the snow, the weight I had carried my whole life before that night, the weight I was so sure would be the end of me, turned out to be the thing that he loved. Ruth Abernathy Calloway, Silver Creek, Montana. Spring, 1936.